Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started.
Welcome back to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast. Joanna is currently away, so I'm Marie, your host for today. Now, grief presents in all forms, and in order to move past it, the path to healing is very much necessary. So in this episode, we are picking the brain of Mei Sze Goh, founder and principal therapist at Awakening and Healing, Sensorimotor Arts Therapy and Counselling, and to learn more about what it takes to navigate grief and kickstart the journey to healing. Specializing in developmental trauma, medical trauma, and loss and grief, amongst various other specializations, she has over 14 years of experience under her belt supporting marginalized and traumatized families. Hi, Mei. It's lovely having you on the show. How are you going today?
Hi, I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We really, really appreciate it. Would you mind telling us a bit more about sensorimotor arts therapy and counseling? What does it entail and why have you found it to be so effective?
I guess I'll probably have to start with how I started my career journey. So I started off as learning counseling skills and been doing that for a number of years. And when I was looking at what next that I could do, I found this art therapy world. So I embarked on this sensorimotor art therapy journey, spent a number of years learning all that I can. I'm still learning. And sensorimotor art therapy is a form of psychotherapy, and it uses creativity, arts to tap into the sensory base and the motor functioning to help people to find a way out of what's really challenging them, troubling them, or trauma, and all this sort of things. So it's very similar to talk therapy in a way. We also do some talking while we're doing these sensorimotor-based art therapy processes. It's a form of psychotherapy, basically.
Yeah, it's probably like a lot of some people find this sensorimotor arts therapy a bit more effective than talk therapy as well, because talk therapy is not for everybody. Are there specific types of people who would tend to find this more effective for them?
So when we talk about sensorimotor-based art therapy, it also takes away the pressure of finding the language for it. So it is very effective for, I would say, pre-toddler's age. If there is any trauma that happens from birth to 5 or 6, even before the language is built, that's really great to tap into that age. Or for people who's been through really, really traumatic event. And because trauma is so visceral, it's a felt sense. You can't find words for it often. So using a creativity healing method, we can tap into finding a way to build a healing neurobiology going forward.
That's a great preface for our topic for today. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'd love to learn more, but before we get further into detail, we'd like to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Mei? And my first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
I don't have a favorite book per se, and most of the time it really depends on my mood. But there's one writer that's come to my attention, Tori Hayden. She's a psychologist, a special education teacher, a university lecturer, and also a writer. And she wrote a lot of her books based on her real life experiences with teaching and counseling children with special needs. She covered a number of subjects in her books, and it's, autism, Tourette's syndromes, sexual abuse, fetal alcohol syndrome, selective mutism, and that's one of the topic that she covered a lot in a lot of her books that she wrote. And I always find myself picking it up, reading it, couldn't put it down because I really want to know what happened to this child. How did it become this so critical, and how she supported the child to come out on the other end with her skills, and giving those children a life in the future.
Yeah, there is a plethora of books out there now on people with special needs and the psychology behind it. So, what is it about this author specifically that you find so grasping?
The way she wrote her story, that she based it on real life, and I knew that there's actual person behind all this story, and they've come out of this, and it's captivating. It's easy to read. There's not a lot of jargons, so you almost feel like you're reading a storybook, but there's actual things that she's done to kind of support these children.
It feels like a great supplementary book almost to psychology textbooks, if you will, or more scientific books. So that sounds like a great pick. Thank you for sharing that with us. Apart from that, are there any genres that you tend to lean into?
Again, it depends on my mood. So if I just want a downtime, I would say romance is the easiest. You can just immerse yourself in it, in that little fantasy land. Or if I'm up for a bit of a thriller, Dan Brown is the other ones that I really enjoy, getting through this, exciting behind the alley, run around and trying to decrypt all these codes and stuff. So yeah, again, it very much depends on my mood. I tried to get into fantasy. I struggled. I gave up, but that's okay.
You sound like you're a bit of a wild card there. Is this the same for movies?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
What kind of movies have been your top few?
I would say a good spy. So the interesting here is, so I say I don't like fantasy in reading, but I love watching sci-fi things that to do with, universe, space. I love those. But also really good biography story, like recently Oppenheimer. I think that's such a really good psychological aspect of that movie behind it. And in saying that, Money Heist is pretty good too. So, it's a bit of that mixture, a bit of a mixed bowl, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like you tend to gravitate towards movies with a bit of like thought-provoking aspect to it, and I can definitely relate to you with liking fantasy in movies, but not so much books, because with books, fantasy books, it requires a bit more imagination, like a greater caliber of imagination, whereas with movies, you can immerse yourself in it already being provided the visuals, and some people might like fantasy books for that very reason. They get to create their own visuals for the fantasy book, but sometimes it's just a bit easier on the mind to watch the movie happen like the director intended, or the creator intended it to be. But aside from movies and books, have you been listening to any podcasts at the moment?
I'm not so much of a podcast person. I watch more YouTube videos. I think you can call me one of the more mainstream people like Jordan Peterson, Brene Brown. But there's one person, she's Dr. Ramani. She's actually quite an expert in narcissistic personality disorder. So I do watch a lot of her show. Things like that.
That's really interesting. I never realized that there are people talking about narcissistic disorders, especially doctors talking about it on YouTube. What are some of the biggest takeaways that you've got from her videos?
A lot. Bottom line is stay away from those people. It's easier to manage than when you're already kind of, in there. But no, she's really great. She gave a lot of understanding and the depth into it, and ways to manage and ways to navigate and how to protect herself and how to heal. So I find her YouTube videos really, really helpful and interesting. And then you think, is there really such people in this world? Well, there is, unfortunately. So yes, I always kind of find her a bit of a touch of reality. You have a balance in this world, the good and the bad, and how you navigate that and how you balance it.
Yeah, this is all really fascinating to me, and I feel like this is something that I definitely want to look up. I myself have been watching a lot of videos about narcissism and autism as well, just to get to understand a bit more what these people go through. But it is quite difficult to learn about narcissism and be like, okay, I have to stay away from this person, because sometimes you just empathize with them. You end up empathizing with them because, they don't really, this is how they are. It's not really, let's say, an overall choice that they're making. And it kind of gets difficult. How do you manage that?
It's a tricky one because the nature of people with narcissistic personality disorder is that they are that good in drawing people in. And then once you're in, you're kind of in, and it's very hard to get out. And particularly if you're in a parent-child relationship, you can't get out of that. Or if you're very entrenched in a partnership relationship, then it's also very hard to get out. If you're best friend with them and then you finally realize, why am I so drained every time? Again, it's a very tricky area. For a particular reason, I don't often see a lot of people who have narcissistic personality disorder. Sometimes they don't even know. But I do know a lot of people that are on the other spectrum of being with someone who have narcissistic personality disorder. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is really complicated, and you really could go in circles just thinking about it. But on a lighter note, is there a role model that you have in your professional or personal life?
Both, actually. Not one particular person on my personal life. I think if I look into my family line, my grandparents migrated from China and left, their home country on a boat to Malaysia and started a life there, being hardworking, with grit, with tenacity, and, contributing citizen, and make sure they build a future for their next generation. So they managed to build a life and settled and have, well, I would say now 4th generation in Malaysia. I'm not in Malaysia anymore. I've left and now I've created my own path. But they have been my role model in a lot of ways. And I think I get a lot of that grit, tenacity, and that hardworking values and good moral citizen.
That is such a sweet sentiment, and I could tear up right now just thinking about it too much. But is that something that that stays with you when, like, through hardships, especially since you've moved to Melbourne?
Yeah, there is a bit of that when I go, hang on a minute, I came here by plane. I've got all this financial security for me, whereas my grandparents came with just what they've got on their back and build a life and find a land and plow it. And, being a farmer, it's not easy. So I have to remember where all my grit and tenacity came from and how I built upon what they gave me.
Well, to be fair, I'm sure you're experiencing your own set of struggles as an immigrant or expat moving to Melbourne from Malaysia in this day and age. But having your grandparents as your anchor and as a reminder, like, this is the grit and tenacity that they have experienced and they have pushed through, and to look to them sounds incredible, and that's really great for you. What about your professional life?
So my professional life, I came to meet my art therapy teacher, Cornelia, and she's pivotal in this moment where it really shifted the direction of solidifying who I am as a professional, where I want to go in my career and why I'm doing this. So she's a German lady who moved to Melbourne and started, brought her young family with her and started building her life here. And she started this whole sensorimotor arts therapy school in Apollo Bay. The years that I spent learning with her, the skills and the knowledge, it was just profound. And while I was learning with her, I went through a whole series of healing myself, because it is learning through experiential way that she teach. And I had so much healing that I needed to do from growing up with multiple challenges that I had, to go through, be it medical as well as, school bullying and stuff like that. I didn't even realize it, but I did all those healing as I was learning. So she was she is quite monumental in the role that she play of where I'm heading now.
That's incredible to have a role model like that. And throughout your career or ever since you left secondary school, has there been a course that has inspired you?
Precisely, that would be the course that I did with her. So it started as the first 2 years of initiating art therapy. And once you finish that, you then have the option to continue to the third and the fourth year, which is the clay field. And she called that syllabus certificate in clay field. And if I put all of those, 4 years together and then continuing my workshops and supervision with her. So the 4-year the 4-year course that she teaches Diploma in Sensorimotor Arts Therapy. And that's what I did.
What would you say were the biggest lessons you learned during that course?
Personal level, there is so much more in us that we need to find a way to tap into, to rebuild or to unleash the little child that is so eager to come and to be in this world. And that's there. You just need to be able to open that little door. But every hurt, every trauma, every pain, every sorrow that a person or a child encounters throughout their life, that shuts the door further and further. So one personal aspect for me is learning that that's that little child in there that's waiting and eager to come out. I just need to find, create this safe space for it to start to come out and be in this world and be present and be doing things and enjoying life and contributing to this world. On a professional level is the way she teaches the course. It gave me the understanding of the brain and the body connection, the science language behind, how I can use this and explain to people and use this skill set to support people who need it. And I think that's the two most profound things that I've finding the language to use the skill set that I've learned and knowing that that's all we have there. We just need to tap into it and let it grow and let it out.
Yeah, those are rather life-changing revelations. It really makes you think about life in a very, very different perspective than before. So it's great that you went through that course. And thank you so much for sharing with us. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. So now we'll move on to the interview section. And the first question I would like to ask you is, how would you define grief?
Grief is very subjective in a lot of ways, but I guess it's the deep feelings that people go through and feel when they lost a person or something or opportunities. It's a deep sorrowful feeling that sometimes you can get really deep into it and you can't get out. Grief can be lifelong, and often it is lifelong, because when you lost an opportunity, that opportunity is gone forever. When you lost a person, a loved one, that person's gone forever. Grief doesn't go away. But what does happen is over time, you build your life around that grief. So I think for me, grief is that intense feeling that sometimes can be translated into physical pain as well as soul and emotional pain. And it's sorrowful and it's deep.
Yeah. And what would you say is the relationship between grief and personal resilience?
There is a lot of connection there, either from the perspective of if you already have a starting point in life that is really bad, you may have health issues, you already have multitudes of losses, for example, if migrants that have to leave their home country because of war, and then you left, and for the remaining of your journey, maybe you have a relative or a loved one that fall ill and die, and that grief is intensify. So the resiliency that you have built from your previous experience, their skill sets that usually they're transferable and adaptable. So it will, help you in that journey. But if a person has become to the point where it's breaking point, and you add on top of this losing a loved one, then it's very difficult to stand back up, isn't it? You just got to have to be able to find that sheer grit and tenacity, but not without support.
Yeah. And you mentioned that grief oftentimes can be lifelong, but are there stages in this process of healing?
There's a lot of misconception around it, thinking that you heal from grief. Honestly, my previous role, I work with a lot of bereaved parents, and they've all lost a child or some multiple children in the family. Grief doesn't go away. So Dr. Louise Tonkin actually wrote a piece about this, and this is something that really resonated with a lot of parents that I work with, as well as myself. She said, this came about from a workshop that she ran for bereaved people, parents. And she said, and she kind of explained this in two figures. Figure one is, imagine this big ball of black circle in front of you, and at that given point, that's your grief. And you're this tiny little speck inside that grief. Over time, the misconception is that this grief, the black ball of circle, is going to slowly grow smaller and diminish. But no, the grief ball doesn't grow smaller. It stays same. But what happens is, over time, with love, with care, with processing, with reflection, with acceptance, with a lot of work individually finding new meaning, that little speck in there grows bigger, and it grows bigger and bigger beyond that black circle. So what happens is life grows over the black circle. So we are the ones that grow, not the grief shrinks.
I actually remember my therapist telling me about this before. Yeah, I totally agree. What are some ways in which people can find that meaning and fulfillment in their life to make that tiny speck grow a bit bigger?
It's a very individual journey, and grief is such a isolating experience. And this is something that I can't say a prescription for you that's the journey you have to or you can go. It really needs the person to kind of sit down and work it out. And I have a lot of conversation with bereaved parents and go, this is where now you're going to have to really sit and work out who I am now that I've lost my child. I've been providing this caring role. Now I'm no longer able to call myself a mom or a dad because I lost my child. That identity, that meaning making. Perhaps I'll give you more of a personal example in this. So I lost my sister where I was in my, I'd say, mid-30s. She had battled with breast cancer for a number of years, and there was a lot of suffering and there was a lot of pain. And me being overseas, I can't really see her a lot. I spend a lot of time with her. And when it was towards the critical end of her life, I remember there was one time that, I was supposed to have a trip back and spend time with families, but the timing just didn't work that I can't extend it too much. So I only managed to spend that 2 weeks, but she was in another state with her husband and she was trying to travel back and she couldn't make it back in that time. So we missed a window of opportunity, and unfortunately, 2 months later, she died. I wasn't there and I didn't get to see her the last time. Now, I did went back and have, attended her funerals and spent a couple of weeks with my family. Interestingly, what happened in the months since, I would be walking randomly anywhere, and as random as this, in the basement garage parking lot. I'll be walking randomly and I'll see a nice, beautiful feather right in the path that I'm heading towards. I didn't think much of it at that time, but something made me go, okay, I'm going to have to pick this up. It's beautiful. It's there. I see it. So I pick it up. And a few weeks later, I've decided, you know what? That's weird because I've been seeing this and I've picked them up and I've put them in my drawer. So I went and did a bit of research myself. And what I found was actually quite profound. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what's been, that's the meaning making that I'm making here. So with my research, what I found was feathers, they're a symbol of peace, freedom, and hope. Now, with what I had experienced towards the end of her life and her suffering and her pain, and the request that came from her, can you extend your holiday? And I said I couldn't. I had a regret there till this day. I go, oh, why didn't I? With that, and also some also believe that it's a message from a loved one. So my meaning making in that process is I take all of that, I piece it together and say, well, I'm seeing this feather on a regular occasions in the months since her death. And she was in pain. She was not at peace. But what this feather is telling me is there's pain, there's freedom, and there's hope. And that's a message to me. So I'm making a meaning out of this very spiritual experience, I would say. And it gives me hope to go, it was okay. So hope is important to be part of this grief journey as well, because when you're grieving, sometimes you can get so lost in it. You don't feel like there's a way out. You don't feel like I can be okay from here on. But with that hope, there is that glimmer and go, I can be.
And I have to say that sometimes, even if it doesn't make sense to the average person, all it really needs to do is make sense to the person who needs that hope. And I've seen a few instances of friends finding meaning in various things that they didn't believe in before, or, going back to their religion to find hope after experiencing loss. And, some people might frown on that, thinking like, what's the point in that? You clearly don't believe in it. What's the point of going back? But sometimes it just keeps you going. It gives you that strength to continue and to stay strong. And I feel like that's more important than anything else. So with that being said, how can one differentiate between experiencing grief to a regular extent? Well, it's very difficult to say what's a regular extent because it's obviously very subjective, but is experiencing grief for a prolonged amount of time and to a great intensity harmful, and what kind of harmful effects does it have on someone?
There is certainly a lot of impact when a person is sitting with this very intense emotions and their very intense pain, and their pain is very real to them. Your body is going through a lot. It just doesn't happen up here. It happens here. It also wounds your soul, and your mind. And our mind and our bodies is one. So anything that we think and we experience, it translates to our body. And sometimes, often, if you're sitting with such an intense emotions for a prolonged period of time, it can manifest into physical pain, physical ailment. Physical ailments sometimes can bring further into, cancer, immunosuppressant, all this sort of things. So, look, I'm not expert enough to say that's kind of the case, but I've also seen a lot of parents that I work with in my previous role. These are the parents that have spent years and years in this constant state of, I don't know when my child's going to die, when the next episode of seizure is going to kill them. Overnight, I don't know if my child's going to stop breathing when they sleep because of their medical condition. So they're in this very intense cortisol running high all the time, stress, high pressured, anticipating that my child will die at some point. I actually know a number of parents that actually got cancer further down the road. Now, I'm not saying I'm a doctor here to kind of go, yeah, that might be it. But what am I saying here? I've got a handful of parents that I work with in the last 10 years that ended up with cancer further down the road. So, and strangely and interestingly, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a physician in America, he speaks a lot about this as well, that, when a body's been through so much stress and pressure and over time, prolonged period of time, it can change the body physiologically, and it can bring on ailments, immunosuppressant systems that, you're suppressing your feelings, you're suppressing all of that. Eventually your body is suppressing your immunity. So who's to say? I mean, I don't know enough to say it, but what I'm seeing is this.
Yeah, and are you aware of any internal or external factors that might influence the duration or intensity of the grief?
It's very hard to say. I think it also depends on what kind of grief you're experiencing. When I say what kind of grief, the dimension of it, the layers of it. Be it grief, you're grieving for a child, you're grieving for an elderly parent is very different. You're grieving for an elderly parent, you now become an orphan. Or if you're grieving for a partner, now you become a widow. But grieving for a child, there's no name for it. There's not even an identity you go to in that next level. Or if you're grieving for memory, or if you're grieving for time that you've lost, or you've grieved for opportunity that you've missed. Now, these are all very different layers of grief. So external, internal factors, I think that also needs to be considered. I guess what I'm saying here is that there's no one size fits all. It's a very isolating individual experience in the grief journey.
And could you share some examples of maybe external factors that might affect the intensity of grief?
I'll give an example. Most bereaved parents that I work with are already grieving the loss of their child, and often there are external pressures like my boss is asking me to go back to work because if not, I'm going to lose my job. And I can't afford to lose my job because I need to pay the bills, financial pressure. These are all external factors. And it may not be helpful if you have friends or families that are freaking out, going, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to support you. And they may try their best to support you, but it may be good or it may not be good. And it really depends. Some parents goes, no, don't bother me. I can't deal with this relationship right now. These friends and these families need to stay out. Or, you know what, I need all this. Keep coming to me, keep asking me, keep checking in. So these are all different external factors. But I think the most common ones that I hear a lot is, I have to go back to work. I'm going to lose my job. I can't afford to lose my job because I still need to pay bills and rent and mortgage. Or I have other children in the family that need me to be there for them.
And what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that people in this position might have to face?
It's choosing what they do next. What do I sacrifice to allow what the next choice that I made, be it I sacrifice myself in there, that I don't allow myself the space and time to grieve, or I sacrifice a job, a paying job, to give me time to grieve. I think making that choice is really difficult because neither is a win-win. Or do I sacrifice my time with my other children who needs me just so that I can be okay? And often I say to those parents, I said, but you can't be there for them if you're not present in this life when you're grieving like this. And to find little windows of time and moment and space where you can grieve and then come out of it to make sure you're still living in this world, in this, your family world, your other people that are relying on you. And that's a very fine line. It's a very hard balance.
Yeah, and it sounds incredibly, it sounds almost like added pressure as well, knowing that there are people relying on you, and you have to think about what to do next really quick. I recently lost my grandmother as well, actually just a month ago, and seeing my parents grieving so much, but having to keep going and to work on the funeral details, it's a lot of pressure from a lot of people. And if they could, they would probably choose a private funeral because no one likes to be shown crying to hundreds of people, right? But they have to decide, okay, well, the people who did love our mother, they deserve to see her go as well, and they have to make that decision to it's like almost a selfless choice as well that you're making while grieving, and that's just so unfathomable to think about, and it's such a big task. Are there any specific exercises or practices that you think would help in this journey when grieving?
Firstly, I'm sorry to hear that your grandparent died.
I mean, like, what's going to happen?
Old age. Yes.
Yeah.
It's again, that's where it's old age. It's understandably that's the trajectory you're heading. But when a child dies, it's much harder. Back to your question. Well, I think it's important to make sure that while you're still in this numbness and you're protected by this bubble, allow yourself time to grieve and allow yourself to go, it's okay, this is shit. I'm going through some massive things in this life. They're life-changing. And surround yourself with people who actually understand or able to kind of go, I don't understand enough, but I can sit here with you in this painful moment and be okay to be in silent. And be okay not to feel like you need to say something nice to cheer them up. In fact, I don't want you to cheer me up. In fact, I really welcome you just to sit with me, wallow in this, acknowledge that this is true and this is real. My pain is real. It's not, not real. That's important. But sometimes when you're in this foggy moment, you don't know what you want. And that's where it's helpful for people surrounding a person who's grieving to go, okay, I need to skill up. I need to understand a bit more how to support, my family or my friend. But in saying that, I'm going to retrack back to what I mentioned. Sometimes when you get too busy after, a person died and you have to, like you say, you have to prepare funerals, you have to make decision, you're keeping your mind busy. there are actually parents who say to me, that was great because I can take my mind out of it. Because staying intense in that pain for a prolonged period of time is too much. You need a break from it, and being able to get your mind to focus on something else, or another child to care for, to go to work. Some parents have said that was my reprieve, that was my break, that was my respite from feeling that all the time. And it's the pain and the intensity and the deep sorrow, you can only last as that long. You can't sit there for too long.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so it sounds like it's a very, well, you've already mentioned this before, that it's a very individual experience depending on what each person's preferences are. But hearing it in a more particular, specific way, it's really interesting to see how it plays out. And how would you say the process of grief and healing differs between different age groups as well?
Very different. I work with a lot of children, school-age children in particular. When they're young, toddler, it's very much, oh, this person's here. Next, the person's not there. Where did they go? What happened? Your explanation to them is very much very high level. Because of their cognitive understanding, you can't go too much into the abstract conversations of death yet. It's very physical. You got to be able to kind of dilute it down to the age that they're able to understand. And I often say to parents, don't be alarmed if your child, every year or two, they'll ask you the same question. What happened to my brother or my sister? What is death? Where do they go? And I say to those parents, your answer to them will become more and more sophisticated, or will include more and more details as they age, because their understanding becomes more and more of this abstract thought where, okay, there is this, after death, what is it? And your understanding of biology deepens as well. And then you'll be able to understand, as a teenager, biologically, what happens to the body and that sort of things. So children's understanding is very different as they age. And the way children express grief is very different to adults as well. There is, I call this protective mechanism that children have, is they'll feel it, they'll go into it, they'll ask deep questions to the parents, and then they'll have a cry. I said to the parents, don't be surprised if 2 seconds later they're running around a house screaming and laughing and playing their toys and, invite you to play with them. That's their brain going, okay, I have enough. Now I need a bit of a fun. It's fine. Because often parents will go, is that normal? Why is my, other children not grieving for their brother or sister? Why are they laughing and having fun while I'm here? And I said, no, that's their brain going, no, I've enough. I've, gone through the motion, but that's as much as my brain and my body can handle. I'm going to do the fun stuff. I'm going to move on to the next thing, and that's normal.
Right. They can't fully comprehend the extent of the situation yet, so they move on. Is that correct?
They can comprehend to their level, not to the, I guess, the level of the parents, right, because their attachment to their child is very different. Sibling attachment, not to a sibling and child attachment. And of course, as an adult, you have a lot more understanding. You have a lot more of that, tangible and intangible relationship with your child. So they do grieve, but they grieve very differently in bursts and in little, small amount. And the intensity is no less. It's just very, small amount over time. Whereas the parents, they can allow themselves to be in that pain for however long they choose, or however long that needed to be. But that's where it's kind of dangerous, because you can sit too long in there.
Right, that's really interesting. So before we end off the interview section, what last pieces of advice do you have for people who are currently supporting someone who is grieving, especially if they tend to be resistant to seeking help?
Like I say, grief is so isolating and they're so individual, and no one can know or understand fully what you are going through. And if you are supporting someone in that position, there might be days that you just sit there quietly with them. Or there might be days if they say, oh, not today, I can't hang out. And go, that's okay. If you just want to sit quietly, I'm there. Don't put any expectations to get, what you want out of that friendship or relationship. I think it's really readily to be open to sit in the pit with those people. And also sometimes just say, maybe a walk, fresh air, sunshine. I call this endorphin hacks, where you do things that purposely bring on the happy hormone, things like hugging a pet, get some sun, get some fresh air, a bit of a walk to kind of kickstart the endorphins, bring the serotonin in, have chocolate. Chocolate's known to bring serotonin. Hug your family members, that skin-to-skin contact. The happiness hack is one way. But I think being a friend, you just got to be mindful, be compassionate, and it maybe just sit down with them and ask them, how would you like me to be here for you? Can we find a way that works? Can we work out how best I can be in this journey and walk with you?
Yeah, that's a good way of letting your friend or family member know that you're there for them without expecting them to show up in a certain, like a specific way when they're grieving, and kind of putting it in their hands of, you can choose however you want to grieve. I'll just be here for you. So thank you for sharing that with us. That was incredible advice, and I really enjoyed your personal anecdotes as well. So now moving on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Before I go there, I actually wanted to share a little poem. Not poem. It was a quote from a book, Megan Devine's book. And I would say for anyone who's supporting someone who's grieving, that would be a good book to pick up and to read. It's called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And one of the quote that she wrote in the book is, being brave, being a hero is not about overcoming what hurts or turning it into a gift. Being brave is about waking to face each day when you would rather just stop waking up. Being brave is staying present to your own heart when that heart is shattered into a million different pieces and can never be made right. Being brave is standing at the edge of that abyss that just opened in someone's life and not turning away from it, not covering your discomfort with a pithy think positive emoticon. Being brave is letting that pain unfurl and take up all the space it needs. Being brave is telling that story. It's terrifying and it's beautiful. Those are the story we need.
That was incredible.
That was from Megan Devine. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It goes really well with your voice, I have to say. Well, your voice pairs really well with it.
Thank you.
I feel very calm, but I'm also trying to hold back tears. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Would you like to share anything else that you're passionate about that might not necessarily be related to the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's kind of bring down to where I am now, the next phase of my life. So I am passionate, as you can imagine. We've talked a little bit about it earlier. What course that I've done that had inspired me. And for the last maybe 5 years, I've always had this thought and a niggling idea behind that I wanted to start my own private practice, offering what I've learned, the skill set that I've got to help others, in particularly, children who have gone through some very traumatic life experiences, and to give them the most and the best they can, the version of themselves going forward and being a leader of themselves in their life. And the last six months or so, with a lot of intense work and finally finishing my previous role. When you work full-time, you've got no time to dedicate into a passion project like this. So I started my own little private practice called Awakening Creative Therapies, and it's pretty much a creative-based sort of therapy with also the clinical counselling skills that I've got to offer. I am passionate about this because my vision is for every children who have had adversities and events have happened as they're growing up, to be able to add on to the skill sets and the tool sets that they have, build the resiliency, build self-esteem and confidence to go, I can cope and I can manage and I can go through this life and I can grow up to be a version of myself that I want to be. So coming back to all this creativity, the sensorimotor based arts therapy, and that's my passion at this stage.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a great vision and mission in your private practice. So it's been incredible hearing about that. And it sounds like you're also really passionate from personal experiences, and the course that's really inspired you as well. So it's really, really nice to see people who have passions like you do. So thank you so much, Mei, for joining us today. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
They can go to my website or my LinkedIn as well. So my website is awakeningct. I have trouble remembering my own website. It's www.awakeningct.com.au.
All right, that's great. We'll link that in the show notes. Thank you once again for joining us and for sharing your expertise and your personal experiences as well. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next episode.
You have been listening to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pr.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.